Hello and welcome to the Huddle Breakdown. It's me, Laura Bradburn. I am joined, as always, by James and Alan. James, how are you doing?
I feel like a classic Seinfeld episode where Jerry Seinfeld just ends up balancing everything out in his life. So one friend has a crisis, the other one has everything great. He throws money out the window and it finds money in an old coat. And the Blue Jays made the World Series. They won Game 7 in dramatic fashion. First time in baseball history that a certain type of comeback win occurred. And I certainly said last week I didn't expect this to happen. So there goes my analysis on baseball, about as good as it is in football, apparently. And at the same time as my Blue Jays do this, our Celtic go right into the toilet. So I feel like I'm balancing out in a Jerry Seinfeld kind of way.
Well, that's good for you, as Christian Bale would say, because I don't feel as balanced. Good for you. Alan, are you as down as the dumps as I am, or are you a little bit more of an even keel like James?
Well, I'm trying to be on an even keel anyway. I mean, it's what is it? Carlo Ancelotti's quote: "It's the most important non-important thing in the world is football." So you know, but yeah. So I don't care about baseball, frankly, as you know. But wasn't there some amazing thing that happened in baseball where a guy he not only threw the ball but he hit the ball? Is that yeah?
That was
He done good hitting and then he done good throwing. Have I got that?
That's correct. So Shohei Ohtani, who the Blue Jays are now going to face, which is horrifying. He plays for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and he pitched the game, at least started it. I think he pitched like 6+ innings, was dominant, and hit 3 home runs. So it's kind of the first time that's ever happened, particularly in a
little Brendan clappy thing. Weird clappy thing.
Yeah. No, he's just like a mute. He's basically Babe Ruth without all of the drinking, womanizing, drugs, and obesity. So he's just
to that.
Right. Exactly. So he's just a superhuman talented athlete. Super fast too. He's awe-inspiring if you see him play.
Yeah, I'm a bit more. I'm like Alan. Got a bit more in common with Babe Ruth than I thought I did. Now that I've heard that,
including the womanizing. Huh? Is your husband aware of this, Laura? What the hell's going on here? Secret life revealed.
Lots of cousin liaisons. By the way, Laura, I don't know anything about baseball, but I can ask baseball questions for the next hour, and by that we can avoid talking about Celtic if you like.
That sounds ideal. Yeah, listen, as everybody will know watching this, I'm sure, or listening to this, this is the recording after the somewhat unexpected, although not all that unexpected if you actually watch the match, 2-0 defeat to Dundee. Stephen Presley's mighty Dundee. Somebody listed the number of teams that have bested us, and included in that list since Brendan Rodgers came back was Barry Ferguson as manager and Stephen Presley as manager. So it is really as bad as that. Let's get into it. Let's get into the nitty gritty. Alan, I'll come to you because I know you focus more on the first half, James on the second half, so we'll split it that way. What was your impressions and opinions of how that first half went and where we arrived by the time halftime rolled around?
It was abject. It was just horrendous. There's no redeeming aspects of it at all. I mean, the sort of coaching performance trope of we'll take the positives from it, we'll move on. There's no positives, there's no moving on. That was absolutely ridiculously horrendous. This is a team that is, by nearly every measure I could find in the preview, and you can go back and check, the worst team in the league. Right now, they may well improve, and it may be that Presley's been, it's a new manager. He may well be working towards a coherent style of play, etc., and that they may get better from this point onwards. And that could be the thing. This could be the game that spurs them on. But hitherto, based on public data available at that point, they were the worst team in the league, especially with the ball, especially in trying to score goals. So, yeah, it was a shock. I mean, we know that Celtic is not the best version of itself, but this is possibly the worst version of. I mean, we were talking pre-show here about could we think of a worse performance, and I'm struggling. I honestly am. We're talking about the dying embers of Neil Lennon's time. It really is up there with that more recent history in terms of just overarching awfulness. Um, and it's almost to the point of where do you start analyzing that? Because normally you sort of say, well, we've got the game model. This is how we try and play. This went well. This didn't go well. This is how the opposition set up, etc. But there was nothing innovative or different about any of that. Dundee were a 5-4-1. They were very, very rigid in their shape. They were very compact. There was very little space between the lines. They didn't press particularly aggressively, didn't press at all in Celtic's half. They pressed a lot if you look at the stats bomb numbers, there was 242 pressures when the ball came over the halfway line. Fair enough, but it wasn't like balls to the wall type stuff. It was just it was good old fashioned closing down, let's be honest, just denying the space. But they did it all without sacrificing their zonal position. They were always pressing from within their zonal shape, and they didn't leave their positions by much. Yeah, so it was just if the ball came in your zone, you'd press a little bit, but then you'd go back to your zone. And they kept that, that rigidity, that discipline. Right? Rigidity sounds a bit negative, but let's call it discipline. That's a kind of positive word. They kept that throughout the game. Um, and what do you do when you play against a team whose primary skills in terms of which aspects of their game model is operating well? We've talked about this with Celtic. It's the counter press. It's the general pressing model that's still operating, has been this season, still operating to a good standard. So what do? When you get the ball, you still launch it up the other end of the pitch and you avoid the counter press. And that's exactly what they did. They had 18% possession. They simply weren't going to get pressed. That all makes sense, right? It makes complete sense. They every single counter attack, they looked dangerous, and they maximised their opportunities in terms of they looked dangerous from every sort of long throw and free kick, etc. as well. This is nothing I've said in any so far is in any way unique, different, or beautiful to how you would sensibly set up against Celtic. And Celtic generally win these games quite comfortably, especially against a team that lacks the attacking prowess like Dundee do, because even their star forward Simon Murray, I mean, he's 34 now, bless him, and he clearly isn't in peak fitness. I mean, he had to kind of hobble off after about 55 minutes. So he didn't even have the excuse of being run ragged by Simon Murray. He wasn't particularly pressing the centre backs that much either. So there's nothing there. There's no sort of other factors here. Celtic wasn't unlucky. There weren't some dreadful refereeing decisions. There weren't superb innovative play from Dundee. I'm not. I don't want to imply that I'm not giving them their due. They absolutely were brilliant at what they did, and they have to be given full credit. They were almost flawless in the way that they played. But then, when you're not putting the opposition under any kind of pressure, then you can look flawless. I mean, they're not working hard just to shuffle. They're literally jogging across the pitch side to side to follow the ball. They're not under any duress whatsoever. The three centre halves never had to leave their station. The goalkeeper had two saves to make. One was a 25-yard shot in the 87th minute. So Celtic were absolutely abject. And I've done a piece on this really for the site today. So that's the sort of long form. I'll cover some of the highlights, of that, because there were certain aspects that were just they were so simple, and I do mean that. I mean, anyone like myself who's coached at a grassroots level, these would be obvious things to a coach at my level. They really would. What I'm about to say here isn't incredible technical detail that Rodgers might have, you understand why they missed it. This is simple, basic stuff, right? So if we just have a look at, the kind of build up and how Celtic built up in with the ball. This is listen, hands up, right? Freeze frames are crap, and I never use them, and certainly not for things like refereeing decisions and all that sort of stuff. So these are illustrative to make a very obvious point, right? That's the only way that I would use a frame. But honestly, you could go through that first half, and you will see this scenario many, 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 many times. Right? It almost doesn't matter which minute I put this up from. I don't even care what minute this is. It doesn't matter. This is what you're looking at. What we're looking at, we're looking at 10 men behind the ball, right? And we're looking at Callum McGregor, Liam Scales, and Cameron Carter-Vickers in front of the ball. Now, this is a really simple concept, right? In football, it is literally a numbers game, and I'm not talking about XG. I'm not talking about passing scores. It's a case of, if you've got three men who are always, in front of the game, in front of the opposition, that means you've only got 7 players against 10 to try and score a goal. This is really simple stuff. And the whole point of positional football is to create overloads, is to create advantages in certain parts of the field, which means that players move and create those overloads through their movement. And the way that Celtic have been playing for the last 5-6 years is based on that principle that you look for those overloads, you move into space, you look where someone, if they move into that zone, you don't take up their line, you move into the zone next to them, etc., and you try and create that overload there. If you've always got 3 players behind the ball like this, it's almost impossible to achieve those overloads, right? And why? Why are you doing that? What is the purpose? We talked about how Celtic struggle when Callum McGregor is man marked. So Dundee said, right, we're just not going to man mark him. Let him have as much of the ball as he wants. What's he going to do with it? The answer is fuck all. He's not going to do anything with it. He's going to pass the ball more than any other player on the pitch. And of those passes, only about 6 of them out of 103 were pack passes. I took a player out of the game. I mean, if you're going to play that role of being that deep line playmaker, you're going to have to break some lines because you're not going to find overloads. You're going to have to be playing pinpoint passes through to outnumbered players in a way that discombobulates the defense. Because how else are you going to do it? What is the point? Simon Murray, I know he runs his heart out, but he's not going to run away from anyone. Would you be happy with Cameron Carter-Vickers on a one-on-one with Simon Murray? I would be, right? But no, let's have 3 players in case Simon Murray breaks up the park. It's absolutely pointless, and it completely breaks down the whole in-possession game model that Celtic has. Complete breaks down if you do not engineer those overloads and you do not find places on the pitch. And if you're not, and then I mean, this is over and above just the other basic point here that if you move the ball as slowly as Celtic do, the opposition are not going to be bothered anyway. We never created any confusion in the Dundee defence. We never created any moments of panic, any people being pulled out of position because there was no movement. The ball was moved so slowly, and we didn't have the numbers in attacking areas to stretch people out of position. And that's just a basic again where the team has failed to deliver. If you're going to break down a defense like this, you got to move the ball quickly, and that's before you get into, again, we talked about positional play. We've talked about how, the sort of the paradigm of this style of play of possession and control over everything else is it's in many ways a defensive form of football because you're reducing risk. You're defending with the ball because the other team don't have it, they can't score. But you cannot take no risks. You have to at some point create danger for the defense. You've got to put the odd cross into the box to try and make defenders do something because these are not the best players in the world. They will make mistakes if you put them under pressure. But if you don't put them under any pressure at all, any professional footballer will be happy heading the ball away, launching up the pitch for 90 minutes without being pulled out of position. And another aspect of play then to move on from this is the role of the fullback. So again, this is a classic situation in the game. And what I really want you to focus on here is you've got the 3 amigos there at the back with no Dundee players advanced to them. So you've got 3 they're completely not contributing to the attacking play at all, not pulling anyone out of shape, not making runs that are going to, make a defender or even a midfielder, leave their zonal station, right? But not only that, you've got the two fullbacks tucked right in. So that means you've got no width, and you've got a team who've got four midfielders across the middle who they don't want to be pulled wide because that'll leave gaps between those four, which then the likes of Hatate and Nigrin and even in the natural dropping can come into, and then you can start to build from an attacking central position. No. They want to stay compact in the middle and restrict that space, right? So what do your fullbacks do? They come in. So you've got nowhere to go. It's just so narrow. You're never going to create any overload. You're never going to create space for your creative players to drop into. And this, again, I could show you multiple times during the game where this was the case. If we move on again to the next one, and I'm picking on the fullbacks in the second half, James will cover what this looked like in the second half more. We'll see that with Tony Ralston, it's like inverting central. There's no kind of very little activity there, out wide, trying to get wide, trying to get crosses in, trying to help the winger out. And the same with Tierney. Tierney's numbers actually improved in the second half, where as the third centre back, he actually got forward more than he did as the fullback, which is ridiculous. So there was a number of, these are all basic things. All these things I'm talking about here are really, really simple. They're things that a Sunday league team, you would be pulling them up for, And then finally, the last point I'll make is, which I forgot to put an image up. I'll do it on the Substack. Is there was obviously Yang. I'm not even going to talk about Yang. It's absolutely pointless, isn't it? It's just why fill our heads with negativity? The kid's not good enough. It's not his fault. Move on. Right, but on the left-hand side, we do have a player that can cause defences a lot of trouble. Now, I know that Tunecki, I've seen, again, no one got spared over the weekend. He's not going to score a lot of goals, and he doesn't create a lot, but at least he does get the ball into dangerous areas. And you give him the ball, he will take it forward, he will get you into the box. Once you're in the box, stuff can happen. Rash challenges. We know what the handball rules like. If you get ball flashing across the box, if it hits somebody, God, some refs will give a penalty, etc. Stuff can happen. But what we were doing time and time again is Tunecki would get the ball, and then somebody would make a run across the front of him. And it was Nigrin, Hatate, Tierney, and basically just killed the space behind him, because the only space on the pitch was behind the two fullbacks in the five, because the three in the middle weren't coming out. The four in the midfield were narrow. So you at least try and get your wingers one-on-one with the two fullbacks. And when he did that, we actually got some joy. But time and time again, somebody cut across him and killed the space. This is all basic stuff. Everything I've talked about here, none of it is particularly innovative. None of it is going to, any sort of TED talk on Barcelona or Bayern Munich and how they play. This is all really basic stuff, and it's also, it shouldn't happen in the way that Rodgers has been setting out his team. And so fundamentally, rant over, this is a very worrying performance because it just looks completely broken.
It does indeed look broken. I think the thing that stood out to me from your analysis there, and I get everybody's going to go, it's a picture, Laura, of course they're static, but they really don't move much more than they did in that picture when it's actually live. It's like possession for possession's sake is always the thing that has annoyed me. And I remember Pep Guardiola saying that he didn't like the tiki-taka label at Barcelona because the implication was that it was possession for possession's sake. The whole point of possession, if we're going to pick up Brendan for his somewhat condescending remark about changing the angle of attack, that is the point of what you're supposed to do with the ball. You're supposed to stretch the defence. You're supposed to move the ball so that people can make runs. When you look at Ange's greatest team, Kyogo, Abada, Jota, they were making runs into areas. They were overlapping. They had fullbacks that were doing the same. We just don't have that movement. Tunecki is the only thing close to that. And as you say, Alan, at least he's getting the ball in dangerous positions, even if he's not doing much with it. Maybe that will come in time. James, I guess there's two questions for you. First of all, even even as bad as we know Celtic have been, given what Alan said about Dundee being perhaps the worst team in the league so far this season, did you expect us to be as poor as that? And also looking at the second half, I remember saying to my dad sitting watching it, if we can get in at 1-0, I trust Brendan to make some sort of change. Unfortunately, it ended up 2-0 before we even got there, and so that was a problem. But what did you make of the second half changes and the attempts to get back into the match, and how ineffective they proved?
Well, I will answer both of those, but before I do that, I want to, there's certain instances where images do live up to the saying that, they're worth 1,000,000 words or 1,000 words. And our friend Gavin from Scotland's Coefficient, who has a great Substack, I'm a subscriber, recommend everyone subscribe, put this out on his Twitter feed, which I just thought was a great use of AI. I'm not a huge fan of AI, but I thought this was great. And for those that are just listening, it's our manager, or a portrayal of him driving a nice shiny green Honda Civic, and Presley riding some kind of old, like, was that a 1920s bike?
Penny farthing.
Penny farthing.
Yeah. Penny farthing. Yes. Yeah. So I love that. So I just wanted to share that with our audience and express my admiration for Gavin's creativity, because I just thought it was great. I think the was it expected? I wrote a piece last week about my concerns and expressing urgency relative to the potential for kind of a systemic collapse in the game model, meaning that as I've been talking about and writing about it, there's just so many different ways that teams can set up now that cause us to become impotent, that, even against mediocre, even guys riding bicycles can set up to really stifle us. And I think, so I didn't foresee this specifically happening at Dundee, given how bad Dundee's been. And how idiosyncratic their manager is. Very interesting person. And he, again, credit to him. They worked on it, apparently, from what I heard in his interviews after the game, over the international break, specifically to come up with the game plan against Celtic. And as Alan said, tip of the cap, it worked. And but man, just not this bad. Like this, you can conceptualize collapse, but then when you watch it and see it in real life, it's like, oh my God, like this, it's really bad. and that's, kind of what Alan was going through there. It was just dreadful. And so, that's my answer to the first one. Second one, I do think there were, this is key, we always talk about relative versus absolute. On a relative basis, I thought the second half was less awful than the first half. So to Alan's point, I think I would guess, I'm theorizing here, that the management team probably did see some of these elements. That's why they switched to 3-4-3, let's call it, or some.
Who won the midfield battle, James? That's a key question.
Well, I would say that was definitely Dundee. And so in going with the wing backs and the right and left sided, the back three, you started to see more width, more focus, attempt at width. Dundee did start to get stretched a little bit, so they were kind of going out into those zones and getting chased out of being so rigid on a relative basis. I'm not saying that it worked particularly well. I'm just saying that the first half was so egregiously pathetic that the second half was a marginal improvement towards, like, maybe just pathetic. So that is, I thought, was noticeable. I mean, I thought we had more space to operate. There was guys moving a little more. There were some wide overloads that were happening, whereas I agree with Alan. I mean, the first half was almost not completely bereft, but way more bereft than we're used to seeing. But we keep running back to this. I would say the two big question marks. One's not really a question mark, but because I think we know the answers, which is we keep square peg, round hole, round peg, square hole, whatever you want to call it. Ballack wishes your wing back and James Forrest is your wing back. So we keep putting guys in positions that they probably aren't all that well suited for. particularly, the current iteration of James Forrest. So even though there was maybe on the margin, the system was addressing some of the tactical matchup issues, the players just aren't necessarily equipped given the roles that they're being put in. And then I think the 800-pound, or the elephant in the room, I guess I should, I'm screwing up my metaphors here, is how many of these players just aren't all that bothered with putting forth highest intensity effort. And, if you mix, and we don't know, we can't attribute that. I suspect the club would have the tracking data on how much these guys are running around and the levels of intensity of their normal, kind of frequencies of sprints and duration and all that stuff. So this should be able to be monitored, but it just, that is another issue, is you get guys that are forced to stay. And so we look like a team that's in collapse to a degree with the breakdown of the game model, all these ways to combat it, because we have too many square pegs, round holes. And even when we do go to a tactical shift, we're still not optimizing based off of this new blueprint, so to speak. And so the fact that this was, and we had some subscribers in the chat talk about, they weren't able to watch a game. If you look at the XG at the end of the game, you're like, hey, this wasn't like as awful as we've just described it. And a lot of that was because in the last 15 minutes, we just bombarded them. And we did get some shots, some central shots from the middle of the box and some chances. And it was more of a quantity over quality issue. And they were defending 2 goals. So, and those marginal gains on kind of the tactical setup, I think, did start to bear some relative fruit. So that's kind of how we got to it. But it was still, even after all of this, in that danger zone that we always talk about, where, a team of Celtics level will drop points more regularly. So, yeah, I think there needs to be, and that's why I wrote my piece about urgency. Like this is now fully manifesting. And the reason why I shared Gavin's image is that, when you start spiraling and saying stuff publicly that isn't helpful or theoretically, I would think isn't helpful to players that maybe aren't all that happy, it does really have that 2020-21 vibe to it, unfortunately. So that's where, Al and I have been talking about, okay, what do you do about it? You can have constructive criticism. We can all moan and piss and moan and everything else, but ultimately, what are the ideas here to stop this from continuing to spiral? And that's what Alan and I keep spending time on, not as if anyone's listening, or why would they? I can't even pick baseball games right, for Christ's sake. Who's going to listen to me on football? But
yeah, and that's just hitting a ball with a stick. So,
how dare you? Round ball, round stick. It's a lot harder than these cricket guys. But go ahead.
It's going wrong. If you made like a flat stick, it'd be easier to hit the damn thing, and it might be entertaining then.
Listen, I'm not here to defend cricketers. Far be it for me to defend cricketers. They stop for tea and sandwiches in the middle, as far as I'm aware. No, Alan, James brought up obviously with the picture, and then came round to at the end there. The comment by Brendan Rodgers. I'm paraphrasing here, but I'm sure everybody will have heard it. He suggested that when you're given the keys to a Honda Civic and are asked to drive it like a Ferrari, that's impossible. Now, there's multiple reasons that you could pick him up for that. But one contrast that I saw in that compared to his first spell at Celtic, I was actually watching a video clip today of him doing a post-match interview after a 5-1 victory over Rangers, in which I think it was Moussa Dembele had come in and scored a couple of goals ahead of Lee Griffiths, and the reporter asked Brendan Rodgers, Lee who? And he was firmly put in his place and told not to be disrespectful. Cut to 9 years later, and he's sitting labelling all the players in his dressing room Honda Civics that he's being asked to drive like a Ferrari. James mentioned it there. Where do we stand with Brendan Rodgers when he is starting to make comments of that nature? It doesn't sound like a position to me that he can come back from in terms of the overall decline of of the relationship between him and the supporters, the club. Am I reading too much into that?
No, I mean we often make the observation that Brendan Rodgers is a smart guy who chooses his words very carefully, and I think that has consistently been the case. Therefore, we should believe him when he, lets slip with comments like that, because he probably meant it. So, but what does that tell us about, where we are? If we're at the throwing the players under the bus or under the Ferrari stage, then that's not a good signal. Really, is what I take from that. Um, all this as well, just as an aside, serves to deflect attention away from the board performance. But I think I know that certainly our subscribers are capable of holding two thoughts in their heads at one time, at least on that one. So, I shouldn't have to say this, but any criticism that we're about to give of Brendan Rodgers is not in isolation or setting aside the other concerns we've got about how the club is being run. So, just for the avoidance of doubt on that one. Nevertheless, on Brendan Rodgers, he's been coaching first team professional football for I think 17 years now, and the game model that he espouses and places upon his players is very much one where I think the debates in the podcasts that I listen to about football are questioning, is this the end of positional play? Are we moving to a new era for football? Things like focus on set pieces, players going direct, Pep, playing Haaland as the big lad up front, four centre backs, all that kind of stuff. Arsenal under Arteta and the focus on long throws and corners and set pieces, all this sort of thing. Is football is kind of moving in a slightly different direction. Now, I think there's an interesting debate, and this is probably one for another pod, about what is the right way to play in Scotland to win the Premier League when you've got overwhelming resource advantage in the bank, if not on the field, I should add. And we've seen the Rangers go down a road of explicitly wanting to play possession-based positional football because they think that's the way to win this league. So all this stuff is an interesting philosophical debate. Coming back to Brendan Rodgers, my point is, how long do these managers really have as a life cycle? To my mind, it's only the exceptional that lasts longer than 15 years. I mean, I think Pep Guardiola is getting towards 16, 17, 18 years. I can't remember exactly now. And I think it's too early to declare the death of his football career because he continues to reinvent himself. He continues to find ways to be innovative about how his teams play. But does Brendan Rodgers? I mean, I still hark back to that interview we did with the young lad from Leicester, and the very interesting conversation we had about how he solved for all these problems when he played against better resource teams at the top of the English Premier League, and got that Leicester team, in that sort of sixth, seventh position for 3 years in a row. The club had never been in that at the top of English football to that extent for 3 seasons in a row in their history. They had that one championship, but that was bookmarked by quite poor seasons. 3 seasons in a row they were challenging for Champions League places there, and he did it through innovative, tactical problem solving. And I don't think we've seen any of that. I really don't. And what does that tell us? Does that tell us that he's convinced this is the game model to win in Scotland, and it can only be that, and you just have to keep doing it better? Or is he just, a guy coming to the end of his life cycle as a manager in terms of his energy, his enthusiasm, his ability to innovate, his ability to find ways around new problems that young coaches are gonna put in his way? And by the way, there's a young coach just arrived in Glasgow that's going to come up with many and different ways to challenge Celtic, and there's a big database in Edinburgh that's going to force, maybe against his will, Derek McInnes to come up with different ways to beat Celtic. So if he and the club can't see the clear and present danger in that, then we are in a lot of trouble. But I think we're in a lot of trouble anyway. And as I say, I think we have to have an honest conversation about Brendan Rodgers, because these performances, accepting the desolation of the attacking part of the team and the failure to replace it with like for like talent, accepting that we still have a massive resource advantage. He still has more tools at his disposal than any other manager in Scotland, and therefore we should be seeing better performances. And it's not happening, and it hasn't been happening for a long time now. And when was the last time Celtic won a meaningful game, like a really, really clutch game, cup final, derbies, European qualifiers? When was the last time? I can't remember. So I think there's genuine concern there. I think it's a live debate as to how we see Celtic progressing, if at all, under Brendan Rodgers.
Yeah, James, the famous quote comes to mind when I watch Celtic these days, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results. To me, whether he's out of ideas or whether he just doesn't know how to solve the current issues that Celtic have, Brendan Rodgers' answer at the moment is to keep doing the same thing, thinking it'll eventually click. Do you think that will happen? And if not, what would be the change that you would make to the style of play that we are adopting to try and get something better out of this team? Is it a question of a change of shape, or just a change of the way we use the ball? Like, where do you see it, improving, if at all?
Yeah. So the way I think about this is, when you see someone in a position like basically what Alan just described, which is someone who has a track record of having been able to address these type of problems proactively. So he's shown a clear ability to do that, including his first tenure at Celtic, where he was far more flexible relative to kind of how he would deploy his game model on a tactical basis. So he clearly has that ability. So then why this relative rigidity? Talents, we must think that continues to be the answer. I think the more important question is why. And to me, I spoke about this. I've written about it. I did the same thing back in 2020 as far as a true underlying risk factor for Neil Lennon at the time, which is this issue of cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias, which is, again, anyone that looks into this, I've experienced it professionally at one point years ago, which is it really is like your brain breaking. And another way I've heard it described within the context of US politics, given the craziness that's going on in the Trump era, is it's like you have one movie screen with half the country watching one movie and the other half of the country watching a completely different movie. Two separate realities, perceived realities, as far as what's actually going on. So I worry that given the craziness that went on this summer, that he had some kind of dissonance triggered, and that everything that takes place that, like Tanecki having a couple of good games, I even said at the time, the big risk of him looking even workable or playable as that wide option in the wing was that would prevent the recognition and the ability. So that's classic confirmation bias in a dissonance kind of heuristic. So I have no clue. I'm totally playing pop psychologist here in that regard, but I think that's a big factor and a big risk, as it was with Lennon in making changes in 2020. And again, to credit Neil Lennon at that point, he did make changes. It's just they were too late. And then by the time you make other mistakes like going to Dubai and all this other nonsense, that and this is why Alan and I talk about the importance, when you have all of these risks layered on top, is that when they start to manifest, when you start to get this feedback loop, you have to take dramatic, evasive measures in order to stop this craziness from happening. Because inevitably what happens when stuff starts to go haywire, you get blame games, you get the support goes berserk and starts going back. Everyone falls back on their priors. So you have 50,000 people watching the same game, and it just devolves into everyone hating and blaming the person that they have their stack of biases against. So how do you objectively navigate your way through that? And that's where I think, to me, a perfect example of this is we have a player that we signed this summer who has a skill set that addresses nearly everything that Allen went through in that first half is problematic. Don't move the ball fast enough, breaks the lines as a deep line playmaker. He's actually fast. We haven't seen him. They tried to dump him. He was supposed to be a loanee right away. He was a club signing. I'm talking about Inamura, by the way. Still the president of his fan club. So all of the issues that he theoretically could have relative to defending, I haven't seen Srirachi be some lockdown defender, by the way. Not that he's been a bad player. That's not me being critical of Srirachi. It's that we've signed this other loanee, middle-aged loanee, to come in and play as a left back, and we already had a guy that kind of was doing a lot of stuff that we don't have anyone else that can do. So why is he not getting any sniff at all? That, to me, reeks of something's not right. Even Yamada, I know opinions are disparate on Yamada, but the guy is fast and is a penalty box poaching striker. Do you think maybe we need somebody that can do that other than Kenny? Because he's clearly not doing it. So the fact that he's had no exposure, so it's the extremeness of some of these things that just, to me, make no sense, and that reek of, a serious problem with decision making. So Allen broke down. I'm just going to say, as far as what to do, go back to watch a couple of weeks ago when Allen made his case on 3-4-2-1. I'm still a full subscriber to that as a potential, a way to address this. Again, there is no great solution because recruitment's been that bad. It's a question of how do you reach a threshold of having enough players of square pegs, square holes, that you can have a functional team, not what we just saw against Dundee.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up Inamura and Yamada. People are still asking that question about why they're not getting used. Brendan, as we know, termed them club signings. And I think we could sit here and speculate till the cows come home about whether their use is, or lack of use, is an indication of Brendan's relationship with those higher up at the club. Because as we all know, the minutes of the fan meeting with Michael Nicholson came out, and when he was specifically asked about why Brendan called them club signings, I think the minute said that he shrugged his shoulders. So, they perhaps lie at the heart of the issues. Yeah. And I don't know that we'll ever get those answers. Alan, it's difficult to watch Celtic at the moment for a number of reasons, but it doesn't bode well for Thursday night. Where do you see us going in Thursday night in terms of selection, in terms of approach to the game? Is it more of the same, do you think? Or do you think there is going to be room for some sort of change up of things to try and get something else out of these players?
Yeah, I mean, you think that you can't just go again. I mean, we've scored, 9 goals from open play in eight league games, and we're not overperforming or underperforming, sorry, or whatever, massively on our XG, etc. So, we reference, the Kairat game, couldn't score, didn't look like scoring. So the issues there are clear. So you need to find a way to configure it. You need to come up with a solution that better gets your attacking talent into better positions and creates more chance. You've got to, but just attitudinally, you've got to put more risk into the game. You can't just continually recycle the ball. There isn't going to be, when you've got 5 defenders across the box and 4 screening the centre of the goal, there's not going to be a perfect moment to play the killer pass. And anyway, the killer pass just gets intercepted and turns into a transition moment opportunity for the opposition the way it's going at the moment. So you've got to make the other teams defend. You've got to put risk into the game. You've got to, take on defenders out wide. You've got to, flash balls across the box. You've got to ask questions, make defenders turn. Just put risk into the game. Put doubt into defenders' minds. It's too safe. It's too, and that's just a mindset. That's just a more aggressive way of attacking, just being braver with your attacking play, not worrying about losing the ball. I mean, to have 70 or 100, 700 passes and have 2 shots on target, one of them from outside the box, is ridiculous against a team of that. Again, don't want to be disrespectful for Dundee. I'm just reflecting the numbers that are public data. I'm not giving you an opinion on them as people. It's just a fact that they're not a good football team. So to generate that paucity of attacking output, you have to be looking at it and thinking, right, how do we improve this? So Brendan Rodgers has to, rewire the bit of his brain that had that, more innovative way of looking at football, coming up with a different solution to get this group of players creating more chances, creating more danger. And if it means, a little bit less defensive solidity, fine. We're not conceding loads of chances, really. And set pieces are a problem for sure. That, in fact, set pieces are nearly the only way that we're conceding chances in the league. I mean, one of the goals of the weekend was from a corner, the other one was an own goal, right? But as I said, I explained before, from league play, certainly, and that's where we need to be focusing our attention, by the way, talking about Thursday, but in the league is where the clear and present dangers. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. I would worry at this point in time, I would worry we could finish third. I'm not joking either. If these performance levels continue, if Danny Rowe gets a run at it, and gets time before the mob starts revolting again. I'm not kidding. This on that level of performance, we could be looking at third place, right? So, we need to be thinking of ways to get more forward creativity, more chances created, and as I say, that could just be about just being more aggressive, being more direct. I don't mean more direct by launching long balls. I just being less precise, less pedantic, less worried about controlling the ball in the final third. Just get defenders doing their jobs. Let's see how good they are. Because in the Scottish Premier League, they're not generally that brilliant, So make them work, make them turn, make them do stuff. If you've got better players, they're probably going to be reacting quicker in the box to balls pinging about. So make them do that. It's just too safe. And we don't. What Brendan Rodgers can't change is the lack of quality in the squad. But what he can do is at least attack with more intensity, with more desire, with more willingness to make things happen in the final third. And actually, if you create more randomness in the final third, I'm talking about. I don't mean giving up control of the midfield. I don't mean not playing out from the back. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about adding risk where it's appropriate to do in the final third. You could mitigate some lack of quality in that sense just by simply creating more uncertainty for the opposition.
Yeah, it sounds simple when you say it, but how we're going to get there, I'm not sure. James, you obviously touched on Yamada and Inamura, 2 players who are not getting used. Is there any other players? I'm thinking specifically of the players who make up the bench at the moment. Are any of them, do you think, got anything to offer that could solve some of these issues? I'm thinking about, Arne Engels, who seems to have fallen completely out of favour, or Balakwisha, who we bought for $4.5 million and has hardly kicked a ball. Surely there must be something these guys can offer that we can maybe look to try and freshen things up, or am I being too optimistic there?
Not at all. Again, as part of that prescription that Alan laid out, getting Arne Engels as the wide midfielder and whipping crosses into the box would be an improvement on what creativity, quote unquote, creativity that's not happening right now. So that's exactly the type of potential jeopardy imposing, a facet of play that we're just seeing very little of. So I think, even if it's as the nominal wing back on the right side, I think he could do a job. Like, again, we're not going to get an ideal situation here. But given the degree to what, Iheanacho is not a penalty box striker. So I thought when he started dropping out into that kind of half space as a 10 out wide right, like that's when a lot of those kind of good sequences of play in the second half started to happen, because there was space over there. They were creating space, dragging defenders out. That the inevitable problem is, okay, well then who's in front of them? Kenny, less than ideal. Well, what if there's two guys in front of him? Right, especially domestically, and it's not some guy way out on the left who's not even near the box. So why is Balak Wishaw on the touchline trying to create width on the opposite side of the field instead of in the damn box? So that's where, by the way, he was playing mostly at Antwerp, was as an attacking midfielder and kind of a 10. He hasn't been a winger for a long time, and now we're using him not only on the wide left but as a wing back on the left. So this is what I'm saying as far as just getting more people into coherent situations. And yeah, I mean, as far as Thursday night, I mean, it's going to be a huge test as to the ability and the tolerance for Rodgers to make a change. And I think, I mean, he seems to be coming around. I mean, he did it in a way that I think none of us would particularly like saying it publicly, but he seems to have reached a point where he's going to almost throw his hands up and say, I got to do something different. That seemed to be the way that he was, at least rhetorically addressing things. Again, whether he can actually do that, come up from the start and have a new game plan. And as Alan said, nothing radical. We're not talking about becoming a long ball team. It's something that we're going to see from Sturm Graz, which is more verticality in quick ball progression. This is what they thrive at, is when they turn the ball. This is kind of classic, Austrian league. The Austrian league's one of the most kind of vertically passing. And I'm not saying long ball, but it's like transition football on steroids is kind of the Austrian league, with Salzburg having been the patron saint of that over the last decade. So the whole league kind of has moved towards that model. And so when you watch the games, it's like very fast paced, up and down, with a lot of very vertical, direct passing on the floor, and hitting guys with through balls and that type of stuff. So why can't we do more of that? And again, some of that comes back to personnel, expecting Callum McGregor with Scales and Carter Vickers to stand back as three playmakers. I mean, it's never going to happen. So again, you need some coherence. Maybe Hatate is the one that's back there. Maybe introduce. It's not going to happen Thursday. He's not even in the squad on the list, the play list for UEFA. But Inamora, theoretically, I mean, that is what he's built to do, is to play make from deep. So you just need to align these players with things that they can actually do functionally. It doesn't have to be world class. We just need functional. Yamada can head the ball in the box. I mean, he's a good finisher with his head for those crosses that maybe Arne Engels would be whipping in, right? So the cross that Iheanacho can whip in from that half space to the back post, right? So there's all these little parts of play that we just are not seeing anything of, because we're not putting players in positions to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only question I've got left to ask before we wrap things up, Alan, is if you could, in an ideal scenario, see Celtic doing something different on Thursday night that would suggest to you that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, what would that be? What would you like to see as change in terms of approach that would make you think there's something positive to come?
Yeah, I mean, I come back to that more of that 3-4-3 or 3-4-2-1, I suppose, kind of shape. I mean, the shape's not as relevant as the intent, I guess, but you need to have people in the right part of the pitch that makes them most effective. I mean, we've got a massive problem on the right hand side. So I do think that Celtic's most expensive player is got a wonderful profile as a right wing back. If he's got a great engine, he's got great discipline, which you need both of those things to play that role. So it's arguably the hardest, most demanding role on the pitch to play wing back, so certainly from a physical perspective, but also decision making. When do you go? How high do you go? When do you go back? So, having him on that right, it solves for two problems. The huge drop off in quality from Johnson to Ralston, and the fact that we don't have a right winger that's really at the standard that's needed. Tierney, I think, we've seen him look quite, I mean, he played 90 minutes at the weekend. We didn't look particularly quick in moments, and to sort of preserve his his health as much as anything else. He's a very good left-sided centre back. So having him as the left side of that three, he still can have license to get forward. That inside centre back run is a classic. He does it well. He joins the attack from surprising angles. I think gets the best out of him without demanding he go up and down the line the whole time. Giving Callum McGregor more protection in the middle, I think, is a good thing. I mean, in all honesty, I think McGregor and Hatate, probably for different reasons, one physical, one mental, in terms of does he want to be here, are so far off their form. I don't think either of those players could complain about not starting, but that's not going to happen. I mean, I don't. Hatate's kind of turned into the Derek McInnes and Shankland sort of, he's never going to get dropped by this manager sort of thing. And what does he have to do? But I talked about chaos ball. Luke McCown's your man, by the way. If you want to do that, his numbers are no worse than Hatate's, by the way, and McGregor. But if you put some bit more solidity in the middle with that shape, and then Balikwisha as a sort of left-sided 10, and then Iheanacho as a right-sided 10, that is where those players are most comfortable playing. That is their sweet spots. And then it's a question of who do you have as the striker. I would give Yamada a go. I accept that he looks very raw, that he doesn't look like he's got that positional discipline, maybe the game intelligence, let's call it, really, about him. But if you give him a very narrow brief and say to him, look, I don't want you to be running all over the pitch. That season that he scored all those goals in the J League, he was just asked to be that penalty box striker. Don't leave the width of the posts. I don't want you to be chasing back to the halfway line. Just strip it down, play that simple game. And I think the big question mark is then who do you have on the left hand side? Do you sacrifice Tanetki and have Sarachi, who could probably do that job pretty well as a left-sided wing back, and then effectively, Tanetki, you're kind of sacrificing really at the altar of that change of shape. But listen, there's got to be a bit of blood because something has to change.
Yeah, I hope it does, because I'm due to be at the match on Thursday night, and the only thing that makes the cold October, November nights watching football in Glasgow worse is if the football is boring, and my goodness, it has been boring in a lot of spells this week.
How are you going to smuggle all your tennis balls in? How are you going to do that?
I've got big pockets. I'll be fine. I'll be fine. Although for some reason the stewards seem to really like to search me before I go in. I don't know what they think I'm carrying, but I can never get in with
suspicious look.
Yeah, just get one of those faces, don't I? For anybody who is interested, you'll be getting a delightful double dose of me this week, because as well as this podcast that you're listening to, Alan and James and I just recorded an interview with Tom Midler, who is an English journalist who's based in Austria, and gave us some gems about Sturm Graz and what to expect from them. So that will be out in advance of the game on Thursday night as well. So if you have a need to listen to something on the way to the match and don't want to listen to Super Scoreboard or Sports Sound or any of those types of things, Go Radio or anything else, we will be offering a slightly better alternative. James, is there anything else you want to point people towards in terms of content that is either just been posted or is upcoming from huddlebreakdown.com?
Well, we will do a bumper preview show later in the week. Probably be out late Friday or very early morning Saturday, ahead of our good friend Derek McInnes and the challenge that we face. Which, by the way, this ultimately all of the anger, the frustration, it boils down to if Brendan Rodgers lets a Derek McInnes Hearts actually challenge for and theoretically even win this league, which is a plausible scenario at this point, given how horrific we are. As Alan said, even third is a plausible scenario, not likely necessarily, but plausible. If it's about your ego, Brendan, you better suck it up, cowboy, because this is on the menu now. This is no longer an abstraction that you're going to get outdone by Derek McInnes. So let's get on the ball here, and we'll put forth our thoughts on what that might look like, and God help us going into Tynecastle on Sunday.
Yeah, and if that does happen, then from next season we'll be presenting the Union Sanjo breakdown, coming
That's
straight
right.
to your podcast players. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody, for watching and or listening. Really appreciate you subscribing if you are able to do so. Thank you, James. Thank you, Alan, and we will see you all again next week.